Hey everyone, can you see us and hear us? So sorry, we are here now and we're waiting for one more of us to come and join us. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, thank you. Hello, hello. Let's see. Hey, we all made it.
Welcome, everyone. We are excited to be here with you tonight. So I am Jody Garino, and I am a teacher educator in Orange County. And I'm joined by Sue Kim, who is a math coordinator at Orange County Department of Education, and Debbie Mendez, who is a TK teacher in Buena Park School District. And Sue and I are lucky enough to get to learn from Debbie quite often in her classroom. And we're excited to think about the brilliance of children's thinking tonight with you all, grounded around the idea of counting. So as we start our time together tonight, we'd like to start with a grounding. What is your dream for the students you serve? How do you want them to see themselves? How do you want them to see others? And how do you want them to view math? So just thinking about what are the classroom experiences you dream for the children that you serve. So I'll give you a minute to put some ideas in the chat. Oh, I love it. View themselves as mathematicians and to be confident and to explore and question and to love math and see it as fun. Wouldn't that be great if all kids had these opportunities? Thank you all. So as you continue to put ideas in the chat, I want to start with some counting principles. So our session is going to be all about counting this evening and thinking about the amazing things kids do as they learn to count. So as we get started, let's take a minute to talk about the counting principles that drive early mathematics work in the context of counting. So starting with one of the principles, there's an ordered sequence of counting numbers. So this idea that numbers repeat and there's a specific sequence, right? 1, 2, 3, we get to 9, and then comes these decade numbers and a repeat of the sequence again, right? 21, 22, 23, 24, and this structure that children come to notice. And then we also need to think about the one-to-one principle. So this idea that every object that children are counting has one label to it. It represents one quantity. And oftentimes we see kids touch something or move something or point as they're counting. So this idea that this one object has one number name. And then, of course, the cardinal principle. So if kids are counting a group of things, right, they've counted a bunch of different things. And then when they get to the end and realize this last number that they say represents the entire quantity that they've just counted. So oftentimes we'll see kids sort of put their hands together like, oh, all of these, or this entire set is this number. So we're starting with the counting principles because we're going to drop in and see some kids. We're going to start with a video tonight and watch a girl count. Her name is Hazel. And so as you're watching her count, you can keep these counting principles in mind and think about, well, what does Hazel understand about the ordered sequence of counting? What does she understand about the one-to-one principle and the cardinal principle? So I will begin by showing you an image of Hazel. And in this video, Hazel is 3.5. And as we're watching tonight, we're going to watch with an asset lens. So we're going to look for what does Hazel know and understand? So we're not going to look for gaps or look from a deficit lens of things, that we can fix. Rather, we're going to look at her brilliance. What are all the things that she knows? And in this clip, she's 3.5. So what we're going to watch is an interview done by Nick Johnson, who is a CGI researcher, and we'll give you time to watch the clip. And as you're watching, you can drop into the chat things that you notice that she does and just all of the brilliant things that happen. And then we'll also take a few minutes after the clip to continue adding. So here we go. Just let me share my screen with the sound.
Can you help me count these pennies?
Yeah.
How many are there?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 16, 17, 18, 19, 11, 12, 14, 16, 17, 18, 19, 11, 12, 14, 16, 17, 18, 19, 11, 12, 12,
How many are there?
12.
So go ahead and drop into the chat. What are some things that you notice that Hazel knows and understands? What are some of the brilliant things we can tell about her? So as I'm looking at the chat, I notice she's got this ordered sequence, right? 14, 16, 18, 17, 18. She's certainly got the cardinal principle. Right at the end, she's like 12. This whole collection is 12. I'm noticing people are saying, right, she used her finger, one finger, to touch and move. She's got this idea of one-to-one correspondence. She's got a way to organize too, right? She's keeping track of what she's counting. She named the amount of in the set. She's persistent. She counts till the end. There's so much brilliance in what Hazel's doing here. And it's also fascinating to see the size of the collection that she has, right? Oftentimes kids count small quantities of things. There happen to be 31 pennies in there. So just this fact that she was given such a large collection helps us see some of the brilliance also in her counting. So as we're talking about counting tonight, we've met Hazel and we've talked about the counting principles. We're going to share a routine that we've seen really helpful with kids as they learn to count, and it's called counting collections. And we found this activity to be quite useful, and we will share a handout with more information about counting collections and a short description, and also we'll be dropping into Debbie's class to see what it looks like. But a quick overview, kind of like Hazel, we saw her given a bag of pennies. Kids are given a collection of things, oftentimes in a bag or in some sort of container. And they're asked to count the collection in any way that makes sense to them. And that's really a key piece to it. Kids aren't directed to count in particular ways or do particular things. Just like what we saw in the video, it's like, here's some pennies. Can you tell me how many there are? So students, oftentimes, sometimes we see Hazel dumped out the collection. Sometimes they take things one at a time out of the bag, and sometimes kids use tools. So this image that you see here on the slide, these are some kids using paper plates to sort of organize and think about their count. You can see on the right side, these sort of lunch trays. So just sometimes kids use things to organize, sometimes they don't. Some kids will also group items. So it looks like what we see on these plates with these puzzle pieces, the students have decided to group them in a particular way, perhaps, or organize them or sort them. So students have agency to do whatever they want in counting collections. So what you see now are some images, and these come from Debbie's TK classroom from 3 different students. We see a collection of buttons and rocks and fish. And I want to give you a minute to think about, what do you notice about these collections, and what might these collections sort of make you think about? So I'm going to pause my talking right here, and we're going to actually put you in breakout rooms to talk about this. But before we do that, one of the things you might want to do is take a quick screenshot of the images, or if you have your phone handy, take a quick photo. So as you get into breakout rooms, you're able to talk about what are some things you're noticing from the screen.
Okay, I'm gonna open up the rooms now.
And we'll come back together in about 3 minutes, so it'll just be a quick chat.
It looks like we had a question or a hand up, a hand raised, and I'm wondering, I don't know if Dana or someone can help us with that. Dana, it says, I think some people are having trouble getting into a breakout room. I am not sure how to help maneuver that. Is it a feature? If you look along the bottom, like the 3 dots, is there an option for you to join a breakout room? Hmm.
We can close the rooms and come back together.
Okay.
So we realize that went pretty quick. I think there were some technical challenges getting into breakout rooms, so we apologize for that. So we want to look at what comes after sometimes kids count collections. So they count collections, and oftentimes kids actually represent their collections as well. So these images come from a TK classroom in the district that Debbie works in. And these come from the very first time students did a counting collection in the fall. So after they counted their collections, they recorded their representations. And some students, like the one you see here on the left, this student has counted spoons and is drawing each spoon to represent what he or she counted. Then what you see on the right, this student recorded it in a bit of a different way. I happened to have been standing there, and the student drew kind of the circle to represent the stone and then placed the stone right on top of that representation and then continued. So kind of keeping track of how many stones by drawing, adding a stone, and then stopped when there were no more stones to be placed. So the student actually had a really interesting way of keeping track and representing the quantity. Here we see on the left, this student actually grouped the items, as you can see, by color, sort of sorted the objects first, and then started labeling with the numbers. There's 1 marble, so drew a 1. This student had 6 and knew there were 6 and said, I don't know how to write 6. So in this classroom, the teacher said, well, where is 6 in our classroom? And the student actually walked up to the wall where they had numbers written, pointed to the 6 and came back and attempted to represent 6. So many different ways that kids are recording their thinking. And then on this example, this student had a collection of objects and would draw one object and write the number 1, drew a second one, the number 2, so kept track of the numbers. So these numbers mean something a little bit different than the numbers here. And as I mentioned with counting collections, like kids aren't directed to record in any particular way, but do things in a way that makes sense to them. So after they count their collection, they're just simply asked like, oh, now can you represent what you did? So all of this comes back to really children's brilliance and giving them agency and opportunity to do things that make sense to them. So we've talked a little bit, I've briefly mentioned what counting collections is, and you've seen some student work samples. And so now we're going to drop into Debbie's classroom to see, well, what does counting collections look like in a setting of 4-year-olds? So Debbie will share with us what counting collections looks like in her class.
Just to give you a little bit of background, the counting collections and CGI came to Corey's school where I teach about 3 years ago. And we've learned from a lot of different people, Sue and Jody included. But the biggest thing that had the most profound effect on me was watching a video of a counting collection in a preschool classroom. And it was from the Development and Research in Early Math Education website. Natalie is the teacher in that class, and watching her and seeing the questions that she asked the students, how she organized it, that was extremely motivating to me, because hearing that, oh, you're going to do counting collections to help your students learn counting principles was overwhelming at the beginning. But that video I highly recommend, helped me get started on my road to doing counting collections in my classroom. To kind of fast forward to now, the enthusiasm in my classroom for counting collections and working with partners is just through the roof. They're really excited. They can't wait. Is today counting collections? You know, they might finish their counting collections and say, can I go get another one? So we've really come a long way, and I'm going to kind of talk you through what we've been doing. Oh, and there is a link to the site that I mentioned, and that'll be on the last slide. I see that someone was commenting on that. So the slide on the left shows you some of my counting collections that are out for the students. I have them in tubs. And they're labeled just with a sticker on the side that tells the students what's inside the tub. Maybe it's blocks or pom-poms or spoons or dinosaurs. But in the beginning of TK, when the school year first started, the way that I started counting collections in my classroom was to bring 3 or 4 students to a table. You can see that photo on the right that shows some students engaging in counting collections. What they get to do is choose their collection. We talk about 3 steps. The first step is to organize their collection in a way that makes sense to them. The second step is to count their collection. And then the third step is to represent or record their collection. So if you notice the student in the middle there, he's already recorded the 4 bears that he has inside his tub. And he's working on the bear, the red bear next to his page. He was very detailed in his representation of his collection. But if you can compare that to the recording that's to the left of him, the student chose to draw circles and then put the erasers inside the circles. So their representation, again, is just what makes sense to them. While they're working, there are questions that I'll ask them, like, how did you sort your collection? Or can you tell me how many are in your collection? If they don't know how to write that number, we find the number in the classroom. They can look around and find it. And then they are also asked to label their collection. And like I said, the words are on the tubs. They can find those there. So in January, I transitioned my students from working with me when they were doing their counting collections to having a math partner. And so when we came back from winter break, we reviewed the steps of organize, count, and represent. And I showed them in the classroom where they were going to find their supplies, clipboards, papers, pens, hundreds, charts, the supplies that they would need. And then the partners would choose a collection and then find a place in the classroom to work. And as you know, working with young children, when they're doing math, they're not just working on their counting principles. They're working on their social skills. They're taking turns. They're interacting with each other and listening to each other's ideas. I'd like to focus on the photo at the bottom on the left. That's Sophia and Eswin. They have a pretty large collection of rocks there that they've organized. And in listening to them count, they got into quite a debate. When they got to 39, Eswin said 40, but his partner Sophia said 70. And they kind of went back and forth for a while. And then Eswin was very emphatic. Using his hands, he gestured and said 69, 70. And he was trying to get his point across to Sophia that instead of 39, 70, it was the next number that came. And so the next time when I said, oh, can you count for me? When they counted, they both chimed in that it was 39, 40 and continued their count. The next slide shows some more partners working together on their counting collections. The photo at the top left shows 2 students working together. And I know from dropping in and watching their counting collections that they do have counting sequence, but that they struggle with one-to-one correspondence. So when I drop in to talk to the 2 of them, I'm going to ask them, you know, how many do you have? How many pom-poms do you have? Asking them to demonstrate that for me, show me how they counted. And then there's other questions that I can pose to them, like who has more pom-poms, or how many pom-poms do we have all together? Possibly, you know, how many more do we need to get to a certain number? I know when I first started counting collections, I even had a little cheat sheet of questions so that I would be prepared for what I wanted to ask them and what I wanted to find out. So I would usually start with, how many do you have? How do you know? Could you organize them in a different way? I see that you made groups. How many do you have in your groups, or which group has more? Really, talking with the students is really critical in counting collections, because you're able to find out so much more about their collection and how they possibly arranged their collection or why they arranged it in a certain way. So talking is really an important part of it. I do have a class of 24 students, and when they're working with partners, obviously that makes 12 groups. And I know I'm not going to be able to get to all of them each day, but I can look at their work, think about the information that they've given me when I have listened to them, and I can plan ahead and know, like, oh, I want to pop in and listen to these students count and find out where they are in their counting principles. It's messy initially, trying to find your way to make counting collections work in your classroom. But this picture here shows you me sitting down with 2 students and asking them about their collection, and how they represented and how they recorded. Something that Jody mentioned earlier is that we want students to organize, to represent in ways that makes sense to them. And you can see in this photo that the students chose to represent using numbers. We've seen some other examples where they'll draw the object or trace the object or represent the object with a circle or a tally mark or a shape. But in this example, the student decided to use numerals to represent. Okay. Learning from each other is really an important part of counting collections, as well as interacting with each other. Something that we do in counting collections is that we have a share out. Typically in upper grade classrooms, that's something that they'll do at the end of their counting collections. But in my TK class, for me, it makes more sense that we do our share out before we start our counting collection each day. I think it gives them some background into, oh, how are other ways to do this? So typically what I like to do is to share some examples of the prior day's work with the class. And I'll ask the students to share, what do you notice? I might even put up a picture of the way they organized their collection, and then next to it, how they represented their collection. And I'll ask the class, what do they see? What do they notice? Is it the same? Does their representation look the same as the way they organize their collection? There's a lot of language and discussion that can go on when we're doing the share. Sometimes I'll put up an example that would have the objects numbered and see, what do you notice? What do you notice that these students did? What's different with their collection from another collection? And sometimes I'll even show them a video of students in the class counting together to give them ideas of how they can work together as partners, how they can show teamwork. Maybe show where one child is touching each object and the other child is counting. Just letting them know that there's different ways to represent, to work with their partners. So like I said, in January is when I started doing partner counting collections. And in really just a little more than a month, it's amazing to see the progress that they've made, how well they're able to work with each other, how they're growing in working with partners, and also how they're progressing with counting principles.
All right, so with all of these considerations that Debbie has mentioned and just the counting principles that Jody talked to us about in the earlier the presentation, we're moving into how counting collections can actually be bridged into problem-solving opportunities. How we might leverage and set up the collection to nudge students to think about mathematical situations, and how they can actually provide an entry point into making sense of operations. Yeah. kids this young can actually think about operations, right? Adding to or separating from. And so right now we're going to watch a student, one of Debbie's students. His name is Dominic, and he's going to count his collection. And I want to challenge you to watch with that same asset lens that we watched Hazel counting with, but a lens expecting brilliance and what supports Dominic's brilliance to emerge. So let's watch him count.
I have some little people here. Can you count the people for me?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
How many were there?
13.
13. Could you give me all the blue people?
People.
So if you give me these blue people, how many people do you have left in your collection?
1, 2, 3, 4.
You gave me 4. So how many do you have left?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
You have 9 of them left?
Yeah.
Whoa. What if I give you back one? How many would you have?
10.
How did you know that?
Because look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
You showed me 10, but you just said 10. You didn't even count them. How did you know it was going to be 10?
Because I know it.
Because you know it?
Because I just know it, right? Kids will just do things in their head sometimes that, especially at this age, they're still developing their language and figuring out how to articulate what they truly know. But I feel that we can make some observations as kids are counting and decide like how we want to respond and what we might want to ask them. So there's some questions that I want us to think about, and maybe you can kind of coordinate with the questions and type in what your response might be. But what do you notice first that was brilliant about what Dominic did here? Secondly, what does the facilitator ask to actually lift his brilliance for us to see and for him to figure some things out? And how is his collection leveraged to help him make sense of thinking about the mathematical situations that were presented to him? So can we think about these questions, and go ahead and answer in the chat what you're thinking about as you watched Dominic solve? People are noticing that he didn't actually have like an organized manner, but he was keeping track in his own way. He accurately counted the collection without a way to like organize. To him, it was organized and he was able to keep track, right? He counted, and then when asked how many, he gave the correct amount, right? So the facilitator asked, and she used these a different attribute of the question of the collection, so the different colors that he could sort out. So that's separating of the 4 or subtracting of the 4. Like, how many green people are there? Can you give them to me? Or blue people? Can you give them to me? So then how many do you have left, right? So using that, you can lean into the attributes of the collection to ask a question that you might be curious about that's moving into operations, right? So in her curiosity, the facilitator asked, then how many will you have if I give you one more, right? So her noticing that he was able to maybe count through 13 could helped her to remain curious about, I wonder if he would have to count it all up again, or if he could just tell me after 9, 1 less would come 10, right? And Dominic was able to think about that. And we know that he did it mentally. He's still working on how to develop and articulate those ideas, right? once he's done counting the collection, so much of the work is already done that he can then engage in the extending questions that dive into the operations. Absolutely, right? So that's, I think, a really brilliant thing about collections is that kids have done the hard work of counting and keeping track of this, that they're ready to kind of jump off that point to do something, whether it's adding to or taking from, or maybe sorting or sharing it in a way where kids can actually engage with these operations, okay? He was very confident. He was ready to answer those questions that the facilitator was asking him, absolutely. Seeing the different colors. So the 9 and the 1 more, so people are saying that and seeing that. So I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure that we have some time to answer some questions that were asked in the Q&A. If we can go back, we're going to share that picture again from slide 20. And I want us to kind of take a second glance at this slide because now we have this new lens on how we might bridge collections to extend kids to think about problem solving and leaning into operations. What possible questions would you ask based on noticings or wonderings in these collections that we looked at from before? And like the multiple attributes of not just color, but what are some other attributes that might afford us to lean into different operations that kids might be able to solve with? And if you notice some of those things, why don't you put into the chat, what questions might you ask about these collections that would make kids extend their thinking into thinking about operations? So we are noticing that shapes, sizes, and colors are definitely things that we can ask about. Can you give me all the blue marbles or the blue pebbles? Maybe if you were to ask, how many orange buttons and how many green buttons are there, right? So using subgroups to think about how kids might join or separate. Which one has more? Is there a group that has more? Can you give me the triangle button? So getting kids to think about amounts, right? And those words like less or more, definitely. Which group has dots on their bodies? That if you look closely, I added Dominic's collection on this slide. And some kids refer to them as like points, like they'll notice that there's like 5 points on each person. And so we can actually start asking questions about this idea of equal groups even, right? Because kids, once they notice that and they can make sense of it, they can actually talk and engage in this idea about equal groups, which is really brilliant, right? And it's the idea of multiplication and thinking about things additively too. Can you give me half? Absolutely. So you could even get into this idea of like, if you were to share this group of rocks with 3 people, like how many rocks would each person get, right? So we can really use the attributes as a collections to think about what questions kids might be able to engage in when it comes to operations. So as we wrap up, I think there's some questions that we wanted to think about here.
So as you've heard us sharing about counting collections, right, and we got to drop into Debbie's classroom through images and getting to hear Dominic count in an interview, we want to sort of end with this question, like, why might teachers do, why might teachers do this activity? Like, what does counting collections offer in terms of mathematics, but also like socially as kids are counting with each other in pairs, as we saw in Debbie's classroom? And as we think about what we can learn about them and organization and grouping and counting, like there's so many possibilities with counting collections that we wanted to take a minute to think about, like, what does it offer us as teachers? Like, what insight can we gain? So I'm looking in the chat. Certainly we can learn about their problem solving, how they work together and collaborate. visual discrimination, certainly an opportunity for them to feel proud. And as Debbie mentioned, her kids are so excited to do counting collections, how to communicate their thinking, whether that's verbally, as Debbie mentioned, students that were sort of navigating like what number comes next, communicating through representations. Yeah, students listening to each other and just getting to see how they even go about the tasks, right? Working as a team. So as you can see, we are huge fans of counting collections and all that it offers students, their excitement and our excitement as well. So we also have for you some resources. So these are some books that we've found to be really helpful. The newest NACE book, The Young Children and Mathematics, and Young Children's Mathematics, which is a cognitively guided instruction book. And we also have a QR code for the session handout, which also includes a link to the video that Debbie was referring to that she watched to learn about counting collections.
I will also drop that link into the chat directly. So if you want to access it that way, you can do that as well. In order to access the videos, you just have to click on the picture of Natalie at the very bottom of the handout, and that'll take you to the video. And then the Dream TE website, click on the little logo, and it'll take you to that site.
So thank you all so much for joining us this evening. So if you want to, this will wrap up our session. And if you want to join back into the lobby, you can access closing remarks of the session tonight. So thank you again for joining us. And we have our contact information as you try things. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, everyone. I think we had some directions about going back to the lobby for closing remarks. So if you have not done that yet, please return to the main lobby. I think people are still asking. The video is at the very bottom and it's linked if when you see the picture of just like the one that's being shown right here, the teacher with the students at the tables, click on that and that'll take you straight to the video. Alba is asking how she gets back. Is there a button at the bottom saying lobby at all?
In the email, said there was a link that said end webinar for attendees. Did we click that?
I don't see that anymore. It just says to go to backstage. I know what you're talking about, Debbie. It was another red button, but I'm wondering if because the time is over, it's gone now. Okay, are we going backstage?